Welcome to Kirby Russia. Today we're going to be talking about the media, in fact, specifically the German media, with our guest Thomas Röper, who is a German journalist who is pretty darn sure that he can prove to you that the German media has completely dropped the ball on reporting on all the events over the last 8 or so years that have led up to the war in Ukraine. So pretty soon we're going to talk to Thomas, but first let's talk a little bit about the media in general and a little bit about the German media specifically. So let's pretend we're just walking around somewhere in America, let's say somewhere in the middle like Iowa, and we talk to some generic people, Iowans who are walking around somewhere, who knows, maybe next to a cornfield, right? And we ask them a simple question. Could a country have a fair and open media if it was occupied by Russia? Well, their answer would probably be no, that's impossible. How could you have a fair and open, unbiased media where there's, Russian tanks all over the place, right? And we asked them, okay, well, what if there was a different country? All right. And they claim to have a fair, unbiased, totally open, awesome media, but they have Chinese soldiers all over the place, Basically, it seems like every person in that country's government speaks Chinese and serves the interests of the Communist Party one way or another. They would say, oh, no, that's impossible. There's no way that they could have a free media under those circumstances. But then we'd ask them, now, in a country like Germany, that's been full of American military bases for generations, remember that sort of whole scandal, I believe, during the Obama period, that the Germans revealed that the American government's spying on their officials, but they can't do anything about it, all that. Do they have a free press? Well, the person I would say, of course, because our tanks and men and guns and influence, that's good influence. So guys, whenever we want to think about the German media, we can't forget that this is an officially occupied country, right? So we have to always be a little bit skeptical that what we're getting from Germany is actually even remotely German in its interests. But anyways, let's talk to our guest, Thomas Röper, a journalist from Germany. Der Spiegel is probably the most famous German newspaper in all the world. So why did you choose to become the anti-Spiegel?
Because I was believing all the Western, let's call it propaganda, and I was reading the main German political journal Spiegel all my life. And when the Ukraine crisis in 2014 happened with Maidan and all this stuff, I, living in Russia, now in Ukraine, understood that they were lying. They were just lying. And I was quite angry because I understood that Spiegel, lied to me all my life. So when I started to make a site, I said it's anti-Spiegel. It was logical to me.
Okay, so let's break down these supposed lies, especially, going back to sort of the beginning, the Maidan Revolution. So how did the German mainstream media present the events of the Maidan?
Well, it started already in the beginning when I started to investigate this case, let's call it like this. Before the Maidan, there was the question about signing an association agreement between the EU and Ukraine. And the legend they are telling us in the Western media is Yanukovych, the president at that time, didn't want to sign it. This was not true. It was just not true. I looked it up and I saw, for example, an official declarance of the German Chancellor and the German Parliament in the Bundestag just a few days before the planned signing, where she said, well, we're not sure that we can sign it because we have problems with human rights or whatever and so on. And as in the moment when Yanukovych said, well, okay, let's think about this agreement, it was all forgotten. So if you look up the headlines in the Western media before 20th of November 2013, look in the archives of the media, you will find that they were not sure in the EU whether to sign it with Yanukovych. And as soon as 21st of November started the Maidan, this was forgotten. We want to sign it, he doesn't want. You can check it out, look it up in the archives of the Western media before 20th of November 2013.
Well, the mainstream media sort of presented the Maidan as a people's sort of uprising where people in Ukraine wanted to think West. They wanted to go to the West and become more democratic, have a wealthier country, less corruption, less problems. They wanted to live a nice, stable, sort of social democratic, wealthy European lifestyle. And where's the lie in that? The way they showed things, everything was full of puppies and rainbows and good, honest motivations.
Yeah, seems to be. But when we have a look in what the people in Ukraine were fed up was corruption. And the main thing the people on the Maidan wanted was an end of the power of oligarchs in the Ukraine. But the organizers of the Maidan, they were oligarchs like Poroshenko, who became president after that. So the people in Ukraine had many reasons to be unhappy, but they were used to make. Yeah, it was a coup. It was a coup against the constitution of Ukraine later on, and the people were used. And what you also don't find in Western media is when the Maidan officially ended, from the point of view of Western media, 20th or 23rd of February 2014, the Maidan went on till May. The people were still there and said, we want end of corruption, end of oligarchs. And then the new Maidan government stopped the Maidan with police. So the people wanted something else than the people who came to power did.
Well, the counter argument to that is that, no one saw anything happen after the Maidan sort of achieved its mission. We didn't see any images of police beating people to go home. It just kind of seemed like, mission accomplished, time to go back to your apartments and wait for democracy to come, right?
Well, they were not, it's not very, very, very complicated because when the official Maidan was there, it was very well organized. Think about it. If you tried any time to organize some kind of, let's say, a party on your street at home, how much organization is it to have, somebody who brings the drinks, somebody who brings the sausages, and so on. This is quite an organization, just for such a small thing in your own street at home. On the Maidan, they organized it overnight for 10th of 1000. It was prepared. And all this preparation, all this organization went off after 23rd. So there was no organization left. And to get this out is not a problem.
So how did the German mainstream media portray the breakaway of the Crimea and the Donbass republics? How did they show these events? And how do you believe that the reality differs from their narrative?
Well, the first thing is that all Western media absolutely didn't tell anything about the anti-Maidan movement, which started already in December 2013. So the Maidan movement was a very national movement, and the people in the southwest of Ukraine, who were ethnically Russians, didn't like that. So there were demonstrations, anti-Maidan demonstrations in Lugansk, Donetsk, in Mariupol, in Odessa, and on Crimea. And this is something the people in the West never heard about. And then maybe I have to explain why I say it was a coup. When the Maidan thing happened, this so-called revolution, there are four ways to get the president out of office in the Ukrainian constitution. So this is death, he didn't die. Health problems, he didn't have. He should himself declare that he is leaving office. He didn't it. He had to do it in front of the parliament. Didn't happen. And the fourth thing is impeachment. And there's a whole procedure with a prosecutor and constitutional court, and then hearing in the parliament with a majority of 75%. Also didn't happen. They even didn't get that 75% when they make the when they put the question 23rd of February in the parliament in Ukraine. They only got 73%. So they got the president away against the constitution, and this is a coup. And this was something, again, the people in the southeast of Ukraine didn't agree with, because, well, they said we have a constitution, he was elected. And by the way, the OSCE said in 2010, when the election were, that these were the most democratic election in the history of Ukraine. So it was a coup against a real democratic elected president. And this president already agreed on new elections. So there was no reason to get him out of office with guns in your hand. But this is what happened. And that's why the people in the southeast, so Ukraine, Odessa, Mariupol, Donetsk, and Lugansk, were against this. And And this is the beginning of all that. And then we had the situation in April 2014 that the new government in Kiev, the Maidan government, supported by the West. The West always said when Maidan was going on, no violence, don't go with police against these demonstrations. This is not democratic. They have the right to demonstrate. As soon as they came to power, the right of demonstration didn't appear to the people in the East. So instead of sending negotiators and talking to the people and say, hey, how we got to find a way out of this, they sent the army. And if you send the army, people are not really happy with that. And this is what happened. And when we see the big, I wrote a big book about this, all this, with the whole story. And you see how parts of the army in the first days of all this came there and just went over to the eastern Ukraine people. So they came with tanks, and the order was to get down these demonstrations. Then they stand on the side of the demonstrators and said, well, this was a coup. And this is how it started.
Well, that's all very well said, I must say, but it kind of begs the questions. If you say that the South and East were so firmly against the Maidan, well, it kind of implies that the North and the West were for it, right?
Ukraine is a divided country. You have ethnetical Russians in this east, southeast, and you have ethnetical Ukrainians in the rest of the part of the country. It's a very divided country. And the thing is, in such a country, well, we have the same in Belgium or Switzerland. Normally, these minorities, all these ethnic groups should have equal rights. Otherwise, you get this country, split it, and even in war. You can do this in Switzerland the same way. If the German Switzer people tomorrow start to cut the rights of French Switzer, Italian Switzer people, you will have problems there. And that's why in Ukraine there should be really equal rights to all these minorities. This is not only Russians. You have in the west of the country, you have Romanian, Polish, and Hungarian minorities. But this is not done. So the people, the Ukrainian part, they are very nationalist movements. And they are against anything else. They say Ukraine is everything, and all these people have to learn Ukrainian. If they don't learn Ukrainian, they are bad, and so on. So this is a way to get trouble in a country until, well, even up to a civil war. And this is what happened. It's what happened, because the people on the Maidan, you see this, you can read again, I can tell from German, the German Bundestag and the German parties had their brochures about Ukraine. And in 2012, they all were writing through 2013 about the Party Svoboda, for example, that this is a neo-fascist party. But these were one of the organizers of the Maidan. And when the European foreign ministers came there for negotiations, they shook their hands and said, hey, great guys. But they are absolutely fascists, according not to me, not to Russian propaganda, to documents of the German Bundestag, who is not famous to be a Russian propagandist.
So how does the mainstream media, especially in Germany, portray this? Because, yeah, maybe the Russians, you could argue that certain aspects of the Minsk agreement weren't fulfilled, especially from the Donbass republics. Perhaps you could argue that. But it is beyond reasonable doubt that Kiev did not give a damn about those agreements and was going to do whatever it wanted to anyways. Well, how do they sort of reconcile this dissonance?
Never. That's the funny thing. I made it. I had the possibility through another journalist to put a question to the German government. He came back from holiday and wrote on Twitter, well, I have to go tomorrow to the press conference of the German government. Does anybody have a question? I said, yeah, I have. I wrote him, well, ask them about the Minsk agreement. What exactly Russia has to fulfill? Mm-hmm. That 13 points. So they just should say which point. They couldn't answer. It's quite funny. YouTube, of course, deleted the video already, but it was quite funny. So the problem is the official course of Western politics, politicians and media was Russia doesn't fulfill the agreement. Point. End of the story. No word about Kiev. What we see now, the last 2-3 months, is that Kiev already openly says we don't want to fulfill it, we hate the agreement, and we can't fulfill it. We will not do it. So what the media in the West are doing now is quite funny. Now they are turning it around and saying, this agreement somehow is bad. It was dictated by Russia, and that's why Kiev doesn't have to fulfill it. And I always ask myself, the readers of this Western media who learned 8 years this is a great agreement and the bad Russians are not fulfilling it. Now they're here. It is a bad agreement from the Russians. The Russians want Kiev to fulfill it, but this is bad. How the people don't understand that they just get an absolutely U-turn in the line of media of media. I don't understand this. How people don't say, hey, wait a minute, 8 years it was different. But check it out in the media. Now you see somehow, well, the Russians want the agreement, but it's bad because it was dictated by the Russians and Kiev and so on. It's quite funny how they changed this and nobody said, huh?
Okay, and so at what point did the Russians themselves start to give up on the Minsk agreements? Because, you know, a few years ago, they started handing out citizenship to locals in the Donbass like candy. Obviously, if you believe in the Minsk agreement and its roadmap to the future, you wouldn't do that. So at what point did the Russians go from, we are the guarantors of the Minsk agreements, to, the Donbass belongs to us? Sorry, guys.
No, there's another story, which is also not known in the West. Kiev officially says, Donbass is our region, the people are Ukrainians, we want them back, and so on. But what did they do? In summer 2014, Kiev stopped paying social help, aid, including pensions. The people there don't get pensions since 2014 in a poor country. How should they live? So what happened then, maybe somebody remembers it. In August 2014, there were big headlines in the West like, Russia is covering delivering weapons by humanitarian aid. This was in August, a big convoy. And at the end of the day, the convoy was inspected even by journalists, and there was only humanitarian aid because Russia started helping the people who were starting to starve of hunger because they didn't have even pensions to pay to buy products. So this was forgotten then, but you can see on the page on the site of the US CDE, you can see that there were, I think, 110 convoys already, which Russia sent there just to help the people not to die from hunger. And one other thing that happened is Kiev stopped to give these people documents. So what are you going to do if your ID, your driver's license, whatever, is expiring? You need a new one. Kiev refused to give the people in the Donbass any documents. The documents of Donbass are not recognized by anyone. So there was a really big problem because Russia has, I think, 1.5 million refugees, war refugees from Donbass. There was a real political pressure on the Russian government to do anything. Because and you have to know, in these countries like Russia or Ukraine, you even can buy a train ticket without showing your ID. So these people were really rightless. And that's why Russia in 2019 started, after big pressure on the government, started to say, okay, who wants it can get a Russian passport. This is, it's a real mistake done by Kiev. Because if Kiev would have given these people documents, we wouldn't have this problem. But what happens now, and this is quite funny, I don't believe in stupid mistakes in politics. What they did by this, and they knew that Russia sooner or later would have to react. What they did is, now, if Kiev now would start an military operation against Donbass, Russia would be forced to help the people because there are 500,000 Russians living there. So Russia now has no way. So it was somehow, they pushed Russia in a corner where there's no way out. If Kiev tomorrow goes in, Russia has to do something. They have no choice. And by the way, when we say Russia is so bad because they are given passports, again, you can find it in Western media, but you have to search for it. Look at the west of Ukraine, where you have the minorities, Polish, Hungarian, Romanian. Poland, Hungary, and Romania are also giving them passports because the minorities there also have problems with these national laws in Ukraine. Check it out in the media. You find it sometimes, but they are not talking about openly. Just a few days ago, Hungary officially, there was in NATO, there was the question to invite Ukraine to some whatever summit, I don't remember, some topic. And Hungary pushed a veto on that and said, as long as Ukraine doesn't stop cutting the rights of the Hungarian minority, we will put veto on anything. But you have to search for it. The media don't tell it. They just say Russia is bad. But the same happens in the west of Ukraine.